Hi, everybody. It's your host, Kate Did. Welcome back to Hear Our Voices, where we tell stories, give resources, and change the narrative of homelessness, guys. So I just want to get some housekeeping in the way. Please follow us on social media. We are trying to grow. We're growing slowly but surely, but we definitely want to grow on social media because we want to make sure people have the word out there about what we do and hear people's stories. And a lot of time in homelessness, even though you might live on the street or in a shelter, you do feel alone, even though you see people around you. But it's nice to hear stories of people who actually made it out and to see what steps they took, because you might be able to take those same steps to get the things that you need. We don't forget we do have a resource packet. Will always be in the link down below. And if you want to talk to me or DM me, or if you want to be on the podcast itself, you could do that at any time. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And we have a couple of things coming up also. We have a Christmas extravaganza that we're giving back to one of our shelters in Manhattan. Is one thing of just being a lived experience person, but it's nice also to give back to people who were in your position so they can see an example of a person who came out and who is still fighting for them on the outside. And it feels less, to me, it feels a little bit less lonely to know that there are advocates out there who's just like them, you know? So we are doing that. At the bottom should be a registry because we're giving out toys and such for the families and things like that. So I hope that if you want to do that, you can. If you want to volunteer your time, definitely DM us and we'd love to have you on board to be beside us, wrapping gifts, helping with families and things like that. So if you are a person who would love to be a part of that, journey, which honestly, if you follow on social media, you would have saw all of this already, to be honest. And you can definitely partake in that. Okay, guys? Thank you. So far, right now we have our guest. His name is Nate, and he helps in homelessness, I want to say in the US. And
Yep.
he's going to tell us a little bit about what he does and how he helps the community of homeless people at large.
All right. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, my name's Nate French. I work for an organization called Community Solutions, and we work on the issue of homelessness. And really, our mission is to eliminate homelessness as we know it today, and to, as the federal government says sometimes, make homelessness rare, brief, and not a way of life, not reoccurring for people. So I live here in New York City, but our organization works across the country. We work with 140 different cities or regions. Sometimes they're defined a little bit differently depending on the context. And the way that we end up working with these cities is, there's a group of leaders in those places that are really interested in trying to achieve this kind of goal, really looking at how they can reduce homelessness in their community. And so, that's really in many ways, the main thing we require is that in order for us to partner and work together with these different places across the country, that there's at least a core group of leaders who believe that ending homelessness is possible, and are interested in working towards that goal and are willing to work together to try to achieve it. Um, we are, some of what we do to support that process is we give teams resources, these different local teams. Usually we're working with sort of the leadership of important departments, funders, so city or county departments that fund or have services that respond to homelessness, public housing authorities. Um, as listeners may know from the world of homelessness response, there's these continuums of care that receive federal money, and so the leadership from those. And then usually a few of the significant nonprofits in the area. Usually there's a couple of really big, nonprofits that have a big footprint for services. So their leadership, but each place is a little different. So they kind of assemble that team based on how they're set up, which every place is a little bit different. And then we work with that team and we have kind of a roadmap that we've developed over the years based on what we've learned around communities that have been able to reduce homelessness or even end homelessness for some groups of people. And so we have that roadmap that we kind of lay out for those teams, and we help them kind of walk down that path. But we're pretty careful not to be too prescriptive about what the solutions look like in those places, because in the United States, there's so much diversity in terms of cities and contexts. We have really big cities. There's all the way to sort of very rural environments, and in all those different, mid-sized cities, the different parts of the country and how that those contexts look different. So we're really kind of principle driven. One of those principles is that we believe data is really important, and a group like that, a local leadership group, having creating access to data that helps them understand what's really happening within the system, is really crucial. Obviously, we think all of these different players or actors that respond to homelessness in a community need to be working together and not working in silos, is another principle. Um, we're a big believer in groups like that setting a shared aim, a shared goal that's measurable that they can track towards, and then putting processes in place to identify where they think they can make changes that'll be positive, that'll get better outcomes, and using the data they have to understand if they're actually getting closer to the goal as a result of those changes. So that's kind of a quick, high-level version of what we do. I'm the director of community impact at Community Solutions, and so I manage the strategy and a team of what we call coaches that work with those different cities in about 80 of the cities that are part of our network.
Got it. So, how did you get started doing this work? And do you think that what you're doing have a big like, do you see an impact? Like when you go to these cities, when they initially start,
Yeah.
if you see maybe street homeless, I feel like it's more easier to gauge than like people in shelter sometimes. Like you can find obviously numbers of people in shelter, but do you see like when you go somewhere initially when you start, they're like, okay, there's a lot of homeless people here on the street, but like in 2 or 3 years, I won't say a year because it's kind of hard to do things in a year, especially in depending where you are, like LA or New York, because we just have a high amount of people who are homeless.
Yeah.
You ever go
Yeah.
back 2 years from now and say it really made an impact and really made a difference of people who are homeless?
Yeah. Did you want me to start with kind of how I got into this?
That too. Yeah,
Did you
sorry. I
say?
have a lot of questions.
Yeah. No, no, it's okay. Yeah, so I really got into working on the issue of homelessness. It was not what I intended, to work on in my career, but I had decided to be in some kind of social justice oriented field. I had I was learning a lot about community organizing and that kind of work. I got trained as a community organizer through PICO, which is kind of like a faith-based organizing network and organization. And I started working with the faith community out in Los Angeles. That was, and like you said, LA County, New York City, has categorically just is so much more impacted by homelessness. Um, they make up about together maybe 25% of all people experiencing homelessness in the United States, or something close to that. So anyway, in LA, one of the major epicenters of homelessness is in Hollywood, which is a little ironic when you think about the glitz and the glamour of the entertainment industry. There's neighborhoods in Hollywood, and so this faith community was in Hollywood, and they really wanted to organize around homelessness. So that kind of just started to put me in contact with a bunch of different organizations, with the business community in Hollywood, which was very active on the issue. And so I, became very interested in their work, and ended up working for a few of those organizations. Um, and then a few years later, Community Solutions, where I work now, was partnered with the United Way in Los Angeles, to help design kind of pilot and design uh, what is now called coordinated entry systems. So HUD was starting to, um, you know, mandate and request that people figure out a way to work in a more coordinated way together that actually like created a system instead of just a collection of organizations doing their own thing. And so I was a part of that pilot process, and really loved that work. And the fact that Community Solutions is a very bottom-up organization, I think they have, really uh, value having people who are close to the work on the ground be the people who are the designers of how the system should work and function for people. So that's how I got here, to Community Solutions. And I think your other question, I just want to make sure I had it right, was just, like what's the impact that we're seeing from this approach so far?
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So, we've seen now 16 different communities reach a functional sort of end to homelessness, not for everyone, but for some particular groups. The federal government tends to divide populations by veterans. Veterans have their own resources. Um, Veterans experiencing homelessness, chronic homelessness for people that are experiencing long-term homelessness and have a disability that they're dealing with, family homelessness and youth homelessness. And now, recently we've really started paying more attention to unsheltered homelessness as well. So, when we work with a team, we help them sort of see that data, and collect that data and make decisions about where they want to focus. We know that homelessness is a very can feel very overwhelming to try to tackle all at once with the notion of, okay, we're going to reduce homelessness overall. And so shrinking that change down a little bit seems to work well. And so most teams will maybe focus in initially on, well, let's really focus in on reducing veteran homelessness and getting those numbers down, to a very low number that we can sustain, or we want to focus on chronic homelessness or sometimes youth or family. So we have 16 communities that have reached kind of a functional end to homelessness for at least one of those kind of subgroups. And for many of them, they've done that for two or more of those groups. And they just kind of keep working their way towards those goals over time. So that I think that's promising. Um, we haven't really seen a major city in the United States get to that kind of outcome, but we're starting to see large cities across the country make significant percentage reductions in homelessness among those groups. So places like Minneapolis, which is sort of this Twin Cities region. Minneapolis is located in Hennepin County, has made significant reductions in homelessness even in this calendar year. Um, DC, the District of Columbia, San Diego, Atlanta, Charlotte, North Carolina. So we're seeing that, the approach works. And like you said, it's not always fast. And sometimes that timing, how long it takes to get to those kinds of results really depends on, the things we can't predict. We had COVID happen, which really, shifted the way that everyone had to work and was very disruptive, like it was for everybody. Um, there are weather events that happen that can really, put things on pause in a place. Even just leadership changes, mayoral changes, elected officials changing can sometimes throw curveballs into this process. But I really give credit to the leaders that work in these places that they don't give up. They keep leaning into, okay, what's the next thing we can do to make this system work better for people who are experiencing homelessness, and how can we build the kinds of resources and services that make someone experience of homelessness when it does occur really as brief as possible, with the goal of getting them into permanent housing as quickly as possible, and into permanent housing that they want and can sustain. Um, So maybe I'll just stop there and see if there's any follow-up or anything else.
I was gonna ask, do you think is a certain population is easier, not work with, but easier for the government to kind of give resources to compared to other populations? Or they think they're kind of the same across the board? Because like when you say veterans, in my mind, I feel like a lot of people the way they consider veterans is very I feel like it's so much criteria sometimes to even I feel like if you just was in the service and you need help, you should qualify automatically, but that's not how the government sees it. So, do you think that they might get more resources compared to families or youth or things like that?
Yes, I think that's definitely true. I think veterans as a specific group get housing and service resources that are earmarked only for veterans and are probably the most well-resourced group of any group experiencing homelessness from like a federal government perspective. I mean, there are also resources that can be used for chronic homelessness or family homelessness or youth. And, in the last 10 years or so, there have been some youth specific funding initiatives that have come out. But I think all in all, veterans probably have the most resources available. I think in terms of people accessing those resources, that's a major problem in the way that we've set things up here in the country. The number of hoops that people have to jump through in order to even get a hold of some of those resources and use those resources can be really challenging just for anybody who doesn't understand those systems. Like I think in a lot of ways, you know, so much of uh, you know, so much of what we do who work in this sector is really just trying to help people navigate a complicated bureaucracy and to bring knowledge about how that bureaucracy works so that they can access the resources that are intended to go to them. If you complicate that for someone who's, let's say, unsheltered, so now there's no stable place to go to at night. My stuff's getting stolen, my IDs are getting stolen, all the stuff I need to get through the process is getting messed up. And then, maybe I've got a mental health issue that I may or may not have been treated for, that might have symptoms that are extreme or varying, or I've got, a substance use issue that's combined with that. So as you layer on challenges, and I never want to blame someone for any of those things in terms of why they can't access resources, but to say that I think we need the system to accommodate those needs that people have and to meet people where they are and to help them have easier ways of accessing what we've already decided we want to give people, if that makes sense.
That's, I think, absolutely correct. I think people don't realize how complicated it is, especially if you never grew up in the system. Like, I didn't grow up being homeless. I was in a house in Queens, chilling, and then it happened, right? So for a person
Mm,
like me, I kind of got a little shown, I think, a little bit because I did work with Covenant House. If you don't know, they do like homeless youth and things like that. And Safe Space, they do other things there. But even working there, because I wasn't technically in the system, it still was complicated for me to find help. At the time, I was under the age of youth. So even then, it was even harder to find things. And then I was pregnant
yeah.
after kind of aged out. So, and it still was hard to find
Mm,
things. So I think people who honestly know how to do it the best is either people who work in it and they understand the system to kind of navigate it, or people who have already been through it. So now it's easy because they went through the process. But initially, just going in after living a certain life this whole time, it's hard for anybody, whether you have a mental health illness or not, because they make you go
you're
through
right.
so many hoops, like you were saying, just to get a simple service that most people, by the time I was working since I was 14. So in my mind, I've been put into the system since I was 14 years old on the books. I feel like my tax
Mm,
dollars, granted, I wasn't working that much money. I was working minimum wage since I was a kid. But the point is that my little amount was going into the system wasn't working for me. It was working against me. And I feel like I couldn't get the
mm,
simple services that I need just to survive. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be that I'm not saying as we want something, you just get it, but it shouldn't be so much steps just to get a simple thing. like in shelter. You have to give so much paperwork. Why you want to be in shelter? Because I don't want to sleep on the street. Why is it so hard? And if I have a baby on the street, then I have an ACS case. It's like you can't win with the system because every direction you
Mm.
turn, it seemed like a blockade. So I definitely believe that it needs to be more simpler. And for people who don't understand it, especially more elderly adults and people who do have mental health issues, because a lot of things are going, digital. And I love digital stuff. But when you're older at a certain age bracket, because it's so new technology, you might not know how to use it. So that's like a barrier for them. And people with mental health, if they're going through a crisis, they don't have time to focus on writing their name on the paper. So it's just not a thing was conducive for a lot of things. And also if you're street homeless and like you said earlier, your things get stolen, I think they shouldn't make it so hard. If a person had an ID already, if you go to DMV, it shouldn't be that hard to get another one because their face is on the card. So it's not like it's a different person, totally. Granted, people do
Yeah.
have they do have lookalikes, but if you give people like pertinent information saying this is my last address on the card, something like that, it shouldn't be hard to get those things back. It shouldn't after I get an ID, it shouldn't be hard to get a social, shouldn't be hard to get a birth certificate. And yes, some of these things cost money, but if you know a person is homeless, they should be able to get it easy. A lot of people, I'm not sure if this is true, but it probably is because you get like example name changes in New York City. If you have a benefit card, it's basically free, for certain parts of it. I've done it when I had my benefit card. Certain things I was told you can get with your actually your benefit card, but if you don't have an ID, it's kind of hard to get the benefits. So it's like you're in a cycle of just
Right.
trying to get it together. And it's like it seems it's so hard, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see people who have to suffer that way. And it could have been a simple fix of just helping somebody out properly, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Like, right now the way it's been is it's like people who are vulnerable have to do all this work for the system instead of the system trying to work for them, you
Right.
know? And we know that also the longer that someone continues to experience homelessness or instability or the kind of like chaos that you're just trying to keep up with everything, keep on top of everything. The longer that goes on, that people, get hurt out there too and experience harm and trauma, and all of that continues to pile up for people. So it again kind of gets me back to why we need to care a lot about how long it takes for someone to be able to access these resources and make that time as short as possible, which means making it easier to do all the things that you were describing.
But it definitely is a challenge. And sometimes when you go into homelessness, you start out with no mental problems, but as you get deeper and deeper into the hole, you get depression, you get anxiety because it's just so much to keep up and to battle with. You're going through one trauma and then and then the system is traumatizing you again by not getting the actual help that you need. So, and then when you're after you're not homeless anymore, which it could take a while depending on which state you live in and how good the resources are there, you are
Mhm.
still living on with the trauma of what the system did to you, and it could take a while for you to adjust it. Like example, myself, I was already kind of a little bit in debt because I had student loans, but that's much different than regular debt. But I went into more
Mhm.
debt being homeless because my hotel that I was living in, it was basically a makeshift health hotel shelter. We didn't have a stove. So I have to buy food a lot of times. I don't like microwave food. I didn't grow up on a microwave. And my family's everything is a stove cooked, even though I wasn't a cooker, but that's how I grew up. So I bought a lot of my food outside because first of all, the food they gave at the hotel was disgusting. Between not having no salt and pepper on it, it was just bad in general. My child would not eat it. And if she doesn't eat, it's a problem. So they'll give you cereal and
Right.
fruit, but you can only eat so much fruit and cereal until you want a real meal. So it's like you end up going in debt even though I was working, but it's like the money I'm working is for a Metro card, and that's 100 and change because it's a monthly. It's all these things just pile on you. You get stressed out because you seem like you're just digging into a larger hole and you can't see the surface anymore. That's what it feels like.
Mm. Mm.
If you had to think of, I want to say three solutions that you think the federal government should do, like, because honestly, we are the people, right? And we are the people who pay the taxes. We're supposed to elect them into power. We're doing all these things. What do you think they should be doing for their people who are homeless? Like, if you think of three things.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Um, One is I would really investigate the requirements of accessing resources and whether those are still really necessary. Whether that's the amount of paperwork, like you said, um, the access to ID or a birth certificate. What are ways the federal government can reduce all those barriers to accessing a resource? And unfortunately, I think part of why some of those things are in place is this kind of suspicion that people will abuse the system. So it's like to protect people against abusing the system,
Right.
they put all these extra steps in place. Um, when we know that almost all people, more than 90% of people are not going to do that, right? Like you might have some exceptions, but if a few people do that, it's not worth making everyone else pay for that. So
Exactly.
I think calling that out and us saying to the federal government, like, we don't think that's not how we want it to be. We don't think that's appropriate. Getting that access, removing those barriers, to just from how long the form is that you have to fill out, all that kind of stuff. Second, I think, and this is really, I think, a big issue here in New York City is people need a way to bridge a housing subsidy, a voucher, whether that's a different kind of Section 8 voucher or the vouchers that might be available within a city like New York. There's a gap between what that voucher pays and what the rental market is like. And there's also a gap in someone having the transportation and time to go do housing location. And so adding resources that help bridge that gap, um, I think are really crucial as well. Um, and I would say for a third thing, um, and I know this is a little more process oriented, in terms of instead of resources, but I think requiring cities to have data and to show how they're making progress with that data, I think creates a kind of accountability mechanism, um, that really um, puts appropriate pressure on places to use resources well, to use them effectively, and to really aspire and work towards um, making those local systems work in such a way that people can move through them very quickly. And there's some things that HUD does already in that sense, but I think there's a next level to that, and especially having, we would think of as like real-time data, not just sort of once a year data. Um, so those are the three things off the top of my head. There are probably many others, but those are the first things that come to mind when I think about what are all the reasons why we can't solve this problem right now.
That's those are some good reasons. I know number one, I went to a conference actually earlier this year in Washington, and they were talking about certain counties. It was even, I guess, counties in the certain states. They're doing the ID thing. Like they kind of have that like a group of places that put in certain areas, put it in a certain database, and they kind of share it in that way. I think, as you said, a lot of people are not trying to, scam the system. People do it. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh my gosh, people are not scamming. People are doing it. But we as a people should not pay for something that simple. Maybe they want to make it as a
Yeah.
fingerprint lock, maybe put under password protection as you get 18, if you want to put your stuff in a database so in case something does happen, kind of thing. We need to make preparations so we won't have these things happen to people and be able to be get your stuff if you need it. It shouldn't be I'm in a panic when I actually need the help. God forbid my house burns down or whatever. I can the papers were in the house. Where else would it be? I shouldn't have to fight so much just to get these things. And it just seemed like a bother. People think I think a lot of people think, oh my gosh, you're homeless because you pay rent. No, you could have a natural disaster and become homeless. It's like I say, it can
Right.
be fire, you can be in a hurricane. There's a lot of different things why something can happen and why people are in certain
Yeah.
positions they are. And it could be a health condition. If somebody has cancer or
Right.
somebody gets hit by a car, and most people are living paycheck to paycheck. If they miss a month of work, they're might going to be behind in rent. And when you're behind in rent, you're paycheck to paycheck, it's hard to catch up unless you have a very good savings. And most people, honestly, I feel like don't have a good savings, myself included. So don't feel any way because I'm on the same boat as most of the people probably listening. So we have to just be aware of that. You also talked about the vouchers. If you want to hear more about the vouchers, we do have episodes on here about city FEPs and Section 8 and how those go in New York City. We're not going to get in the nitty gritty and the weeds of those things. I did interview experts about those particular things. The most, I want to say, popular vouchers they do have in New York City is Section 8 and city FEPs. FEPs is much different, but I think city FEPs is the most popular plus Section 8. Section 8, as you know, opened up this year for a little bit for a waiting list, and it closed very shortly. It was, I want to say it's a week. It wasn't that long of a time commitment that they gave us after 15 years. Those are things they need to work on. And I think because Section 8, especially, even though, everything has its flaws, nothing is perfect, but that particular program, a lot of landlords prefer to take it compared to city FEPs because they pay what I understand on time. And I feel like some of the requirements that they have for it is not as strenuous as city FEPs. I feel like honestly, she should probably get the income a little bit higher. It's pretty high for certain things for Section 8, but I think it should be a little bit higher. And maybe everybody in the waiting list, they might feel like they're losing money. They should need to give everybody on the waiting list, honestly, a Section 8 voucher. People can make so much better with their lives if they have that. They can live better quality lives, be a little bit stress free because a lot of times rent is the most expensive thing people have after they have food. So that could
Mhm.
be a barrier that takes people out of being stressful, and mental health is a thing we saw in Corona, how that worked out. And it helped people move away. If they want to move out of New York City, if they want to move upstate, or they want to move to a different, they can move a lot of places with the Section 8 voucher, and probably get more room if
Yeah.
they need those kind of things. So I think that's another thing they need to work on. And honestly, I think if you're on a certain income bracket, I think that should be a universal thing that you get help with housing. Because the people who are working for you, if they feel happy, they'll work better and they'll get, where's money going to go back anyway? And back in the economy, regardless. We're not going anywhere else unless you go vacation out the country. Most people don't have passports, it seems like, anyway. So they're not really going far. They might go to Florida or somewhere like that. So the money's staying in the country itself. If your people are happy, you flourish more. You know what I'm saying? So you got to think about
Yeah.
the mental health of your people. And we see how mental health has really declined in New York City. Crime rates are up, people are going literally mad on the streets, and it's getting out of control. So I think those are some ways and some barriers we can take out of people's way to make sure they have a better outlook on life at this point. Do you have anything else that you
Yeah.
tell the people?
Well, I just wanted to call out, I think another thing that you highlighted, which was more investment in prevention, right? It's so much, um, it's really better for everyone if resources can be there for people before they experience homelessness that allow them to stay in their apartment or get into a place that's stable. And like you said, whether that's some kind of universal basic income, for people in a certain income range, or whatever it needs to look like. I think when you just even think about the cost comparison, think about, well, what are the costs of providing services after people start to experience homelessness compared to the cost of preventing it? It's much cheaper, really, from even a cost perspective, to offer those resources earlier in the process. And I know there are some prevention resources, but I think I think not enough. And I think really adding resources to that prevention space, and housing stabilization space for people is another really important, um, priority and thing that would really help to reduce homelessness overall and prevent people from even having to experience this in the first place.
I think that's definitely true.
Um,
I think,
yeah, no, but yeah, if we're wrapping up, I could just share a couple of thoughts Kay did. Is that where we're at?
yes, that's where we're at. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. First, I just really want to appreciate that you do this podcast, and that, like you described, having some lived experience of this issue, that you're giving voice to it. I think that's really powerful. I think we need more voices of people with experience to be speaking on, leading on this issue. I think there is a growing trend around that that's really positive. So I really just want to thank you for your work and for having this podcast, and being a part of that kind of movement that I hope continues. And also to say that I think there are so many amazing leaders in the country on this issue. You know, in almost every place that we work, there are at least a few people that really believe this is solvable, that believe that we should treat people with dignity and respect, that homelessness is not okay. You know, it's an issue of justice. And so, as challenging as it feels, and as unstable as politics can feel, maybe right now to some of us, that does give me hope. All those things give me hope that we can find a way to figure this out together.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing because we all have to be in this together to make sure we can make society run and be successful for sure. But guys,
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
I'm it took a long time, but I'm happy that you came on. I
Figuring it
really
out.
appreciate it. Guys, we came to the end of the podcast. Thank you for listening. Definitely come back next week. Well, technically in 2 weeks, because now we changed the programming just a little bit to every 2 weeks now. Definitely, if you have any events that you want me to come to, I'm open to that. Just DM me and I'll be able to come to those and support you, whether you want me to be on a panel or just to be there, support what you're doing. I definitely love to come out to those events. We do video and take pictures and things like that to make sure people know what's happening in the community of homelessness and how they can actually use their voice to make a difference. So I see you next time, and also follow us on social media and check us out for the donations if you would like to do that, or being a helping hand for like wrapping gifts and things like that. Thank you and have a good weekend. Bye.